Hello and welcome. Is the European Union a federation? In federal systems, generally speaking, political authority is divided between two autonomous sets of governments, one supranational and the other national. Usually, a constitutional division of power is established between the supranational government, which exercises authority over the whole territory, and the national governments that exercise independent authority within their own territories. The federal government governs foreign policy and war. It regulates interstate commerce and foreign trade. The federal government has supranational political bodies such as a parliament and bureaucracies, a legislative and judicial arm, issues taxation rules. Some of these powers are shared with the national governments, such as national judicial, domestic laws and policing, taxation, welfare systems, etc. So, yes, I would say that the EU qualifies as a federation, and in practice it functions as a federation. However, there are two things that the EU does not have: a constitution and an army. And to explain that, we need to go back in time. Let's start with the constitution. We made one and it was rejected. The Treaty of Lisbon, signed in 2004, was meant to be the EU constitution, but such treaty needed to be put to the people in referenda. At the time, there was this wonderful idea to kick off the runoff or referenda for the approval of the treaty in France. And the French said no. It was tried in the Netherlands and again no. So we don't have a constitution. Instead, we have a reform treaty, which does everything the constitution was meant to do but doesn't say constitution anywhere. And because, technically speaking, it is not a constitution, it didn't need to be put to the people in referenda. And it just needed to be signed off by the political representatives of the member states. The treaty official name is the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, and it grants legal personality to the EU, made the Charter of Fundamental Rights legally binding, and brought about several institutional reforms. The treaty provided for a strengthening of the legislative and budgetary powers of the European Parliament, the redefinition and extension of qualified majority voting in the Council, the formal recognition of the European Council as an institution and the creation of the post of President of the Council, the creation of the post of High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. And it entered into force on the 1st of December 2009. And at this point, I should also mention that this is not the first time that the French throw a spanner in the works, so to speak. In the distant summer of 1950, with the start of the Korean War, minds turned to the threat posed to Europe by the Soviet Union. Jean Monnet, General Commissioner of the French National Planning Board, using the Schuman proposal as a blueprint, put forward a plan for a European army. When the topic came up in the French National Assembly in 1954, Edouard Herriot torpedoed it. To put it into perspective, at the time it was a big ask to expect people to smile and nod at the prospect of Germany rearming, even as part of a European force. The formation of a European army is still one of the goals of the EU, but the suggestion that the EU elite are using the conflict in Ukraine and the Russian threat to get their beloved army is too cynical even for me to consider. I mentioned the Schuman Plan, and I don't believe it is possible to understand the EU without looking at its founding documents, the Manifesto and its actualization to an extent, the Schuman Plan. Let's start with the Schuman Plan. The Schuman Declaration was presented by French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman on the 9th of May 1950. It proposed the creation of a European coal and steel community. whose members would pool coal and steel production. From that nucleus followed such things as free trade. Free trade means that the participants do not have to pay import-export duties. Sounds simple, right? But to make it fair for everybody, it requires standardization of the product traded inside this club, which means accepting a common regulatory framework, ensuring a common standard for the product and the production process. Then, of course, you don't want nasty undercutting, so no monetary devaluing to make your goods look cheaper. Hence the monetary policies. And, of course, you need an independent court to preside over the inevitable disputes, and so on and so forth. So, what might have looked like a simple trade agreement, in reality has always meant to be the start of the federal project. And it is based on the simple but genius insight that money outlasts politicians. The other fundamental document is the Manifesto of Ventotene. But before I tell you about the manifesto, we need some context. It was written in 1941 by the anti-fascist activists Ernesto Rossi and Altiero Spinelli, while under house arrest on the Italian island of Ventotene. Both had witnessed the rise of Benito Mussolini, who incidentally won fair in the free elections of 1921. He won big in the not free and fair election of 1924. Mussolini started off as a revolutionary socialist and later moved to National Socialism, a form of state-centric socialism or socialist regime. And in Germany, Adolf Hitler, the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party or Nazi Party, who also won in some fair elections and others not so fair, picked up socialism in its nationalist form. Both men found their support in people's anger, frustration and hardship, while singing the siren songs of promising to bring stability and order to society in the ears of the scared elites. Yes, you can flip the pancake as many times as you want, and many have done just that, but both Mussolini and Hitler came from or adopted co-socialist ideas. In short, they were leftists. Link below to the articles, essays and books on which I base this statement. A small digression. If you can delay the hissy fit for a minute, if you think about it, the slide into authoritarianism is a risk baked into an all-encompassing political ideology such as socialism. In simple terms, if you believe that you are working for the good of the people, by definition, anyone that criticizes you or opposes you is an enemy of the people. But back to the manifesto. The authors of the manifesto expected the fall of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy will be followed by a revolutionary period, caused by the privileged elites trying to reassert the old systems and the masses seeking freedom. A bit like what happened after the Congress of Vienna at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, when countries, instead of fighting each other, started fighting people's uprisings and revolts. And I'll give you some highlights of the manifesto. According to the manifesto, the root of all conflicts in Europe is the nation-state and its inevitable desire to dominate others. So the only path out of the cycle of war and death is turning Europe into a federation. Another interesting point: in order to avoid the crisis, the revolution must be managed and it must be socialist, where economics work for all the people and not just a few, while the rest struggle and suffer. And it must not be allowed to slide into communism. And to achieve that, there must be a plan. To ensure success, the movement must include all groups in society, and its leaders must operate inside societies and steer people's sentiments and ideas towards the goals of the movement, and guide their steps towards the natural realization that the Socialist Federation will benefit everyone. The socialist-informed federation envisaged in the manifesto makes two commitments to the people of Europe: peace and a fair society, where everyone can expect a modicum of economic security and comfort. The EU has involved itself and, by extension, EU citizens into a war with Russia, and that is a betrayal, in my opinion, of the original promise, peace in exchange for sovereignty. Moreover, the failure to develop a meaningful relation with the Russian Federation that emerged when the Soviet Union ended is our failure. As a community, we failed to engage with our biggest neighbor in a constructive manner, and at every junction we have failed more spectacularly than before, to the point that our representatives at the beginning of the 2022 war chose to close diplomatic channels with Russia. And because of all that, I believe we are complicit in the war in Ukraine. Prosperity is another EU promise. Data on the real disposable income comes in handy here. This is the graph for the percentage changes in disposable income across the EU and the Eurozone, both nominal and real. This type of data hides many things, but overall, the middle income group has been feeling the pinch for a few years. I talked about the decline of the middle income group in Europe and the rest of the Western world in my video on the introduction of the euro in Bulgaria, link at the end. But in short, the middle is being squeezed, and this is feeding political unrest in Europe. An increasing number of people feel that neither their national governments or the EU are able to react to their needs, demands, and expectations in a timely manner. This is causing a certain level of frustration and irritation. Sanctions on Russia have added to pre-existing downwards pressure on the economies of Europe, and the EU's reshape of geoeconomics and geopolitics have added to the economic headwinds. At the moment, in the eyes of an increasing number of Europeans, the EU is failing to deliver on the economic promise while asking for more transfers of national powers to it. The EU is the elite political project for the people of Europe. This is evident in the manifesto, and the manifesto is surprisingly still very relevant. For example, propaganda and agents are key to creating popular support for the federal project, and after the constitution was rejected in the referenda in France and the Netherlands, one of the reasons given for the results was inadequate level and depth of propaganda. Information and education campaigns, as well as antagonistic messaging from some media outlets. The manifesto also states that during crisis or revolutionary times, democracies are dead weight. Autocratic leadership apparently is needed. And interestingly, during the pandemic, the EU took some, let's say, strong actions, such as the COVID passport, which effectively removed personal freedoms for people that opted not to be vaccinated. The manifesto also gives guidelines on who should be recruited as active participants in the project. In short, only true believers. On one hand, this enables the project to speak with one voice when it comes to the federation and the unity of Europe. On the other hand, it leads to group thinking, blind spots, and overall a lack of self-scrutiny and criticism, as it became apparent in the Qatari scandal, when a number of MEPs were accused of taking bribes. And until the scandal splashed all over the media and the police started raiding properties and picking up MEPs and their assistants, no one in the whole of the EU knew anything about it. Well, let's wrap it up. So, to conclude, how do I feel about the EU? In short, it could be better and maybe should do better. But I still think that of the options on the table, it is the best one. Parties have emerged that challenge directly or indirectly the EU project, and some of the criticism they put forward is valid. However, I cannot see that they provide a valid or viable alternative. And ultimately, I am pro-EU because of my age. My grandparents survived by the skin of their teeth 2 world wars. I have never experienced war. I grew up having to show a passport or a special pass to visit relatives that lived less than 2 kilometers away from me, but happened to be in a different country. Nowadays, I can take a leisurely walk across those old borders without the need to show any papers or having my bags searched. And I'm still very grateful for that. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you feel like it. And bye bye until next time.